We're rolling.
Welcome to the REI Rookies Podcast.
The Real Estate Investing Rookies Podcast, episode number 56, where we invite you to follow us on our journey towards financial freedom using the power of real estate. I'm Josh Koth.
And I'm Jack Haas.
And here at REI Rookies, we believe in a couple key principles. Number one, the best way to retain information is by teaching it to others. And number two, a rising tide lifts all boats. We're not competitors, we're a community. So let's get into some real estate investing.
So this week we have a very special guest in Kevin Bupp. Is a Florida-based real estate investor, top iTunes podcast host, and a serial entrepreneur with over $40 million in real estate transactions. His extensive investment experience spans the gamut of apartment buildings, single-family homes, office buildings, raw land, condos, and his favorite and by far the most profitable, mobile home parks. Is there anything else that I need to add there, Kevin?
I don't think so. You got it. You nailed it on the head.
It seems like your experience has been pretty extensive. Can you give us a little background of like what started this whole progress and what spurred the seed of real estate investing?
Sure, absolutely. Well, I wish I could say that there was something that really spurred the seed and that it was my idea initially, but that wasn't the case. And so I'll give you the quick condensed version of how I ended up in the real estate investing world. And so I graduated high school and didn't go away to college like a lot of my friends did. I wasn't the most studious individual. And so I knew that if I went away, I would have probably burned up my parents' investment in their savings by going away to school and just partying too much. And so I took the responsible path and stayed at community college there locally, got a bartending job, and just was having fun, not really with too much of a plan of what I wanted to do in life, just trying to figure things out at that point. And about a year into it, I was 19, along came a gentleman by the name of David. And David happened to be dating the mother of a girl that I was dating. So I met David through my girlfriend and her mother. And over a period of a few months, got to know David a little bit more and found out that he was a local real estate investor. He was about 20 years older than I. And he owned a large number of single family and smaller multifamily properties. And that's what he did. Like that didn't make sense to me at that time, but that's what he did for money. You know, that I was wondering, I always wondered why I saw him around every once in a while around their house during the day when normal older folks should be working, right? I used to make the joke at him, shouldn't you be at your job? And he's like, well, I am at my job. And so David took a liking to me. I took a liking to David. We became good buddies. And he ended up inviting me to a 3-day boot camp down in Philadelphia. Again, I didn't know anything about real estate. I'd never read a book on real estate investing, but I saw it as an opportunity in that this gentleman, this very successful gentleman, was willing to invite me to something that cost him a good bit of money because he thought I might have an interest in it. And so I went, and it was a 3-day boot camp on how to fix and flip homes, single family homes. And I went there and was exposed to lots of great ideas, lots of people that were making phenomenal money, and also exposed to people that I didn't feel were that much smarter than I was, that were being very successful at this. And I came back with a kind of a mission of, I'm going to do this. Still don't know how yet, but I'm going to do this. And so I basically went to David and told him that, or asked him if he would take me under his wing and that I would do anything and everything he needed. I mean, I would help in any capacity possible. Whatever he needed, I would be there free of charge for as long as it took so that I could learn this business inside and out. And that's what I did. He accepted the offer and essentially went underneath his wing for a little over a year before I ended up buying my very first property when I was 20 years old, which was basically a fix and hold, and then soon I flipped after that a couple years later, but it was a fix and hold project. Mm-hmm. And I continued doing that for a number of years in the single family home space and the smaller multifamily space, just like he was doing. I pretty much modeled what he did. And moved into apartments years down the road, buying apartment complexes. And then real quick and short, 2008 happened. Lost a lot of what I had built over the 7 or 8 years prior. And took a few years hiatus. And then got introduced to mobile home parks about 6 years ago, which is where we're at today. So that was the very condensed 10,000 foot view version of how I got introduced to the real estate world.
So question for you, a couple of questions actually were sparked by that little history there. So in 2008, what was and kind of as a cautionary tale to
Mhm.
people that are investing in single family homes, small multis, what was the trigger that caused it to collapse for you? Is it that people weren't renting anymore, or that you were banking on appreciation and that wasn't happening?
There was a lot of different, all the above, all the above. I was in Southwest Florida at the time. I moved down to Florida in 2002, and basically spent all my focus and efforts in Southwest Florida. I'm in the Tampa market, so basically Tampa and then all the way south.
Mhm.
And as you know, at least from the news headlines, Florida was one of the hardest hit states during the recession and the real estate crash. And so there was lots of things that happened, lots of factors. There was lots of speculative home builders in this marketplace that were building thousands upon thousands of rooftops for people that weren't here, population that wasn't coming at that point in time. And so a couple of big things kind of happened. It was somewhat of a perfect storm. We did bank on appreciation, but that wasn't our model. I look back and see that our model was a little skewed because we really got hung up on the idea of that it looks so great on paper. We did have cash flow, we did buy for cash flow, but it was definitely more heavily weighted towards the appreciation side.
Mhm.
And so what happened is the appreciation went bye-bye in a matter of 8 months. Like literally it went from very low leverage. We were on average somewhere in the low 60% range as far as leverage was concerned on our properties to
Yeah.
basically being negative on a number of the properties, upside down. And on top of that, there were a lot of these spec builders that were building brand new 322s that, I mean, I'm talking about by the droves, and they started poaching in a couple of the areas where we had a heavy concentration of homes. They started poaching renters, essentially renting these brand new homes, never occupied, for about the same or sometimes even less or not much more, very close to what we were renting older, 20 or 25-year-old
Because
homes
they were
for.
desperate for any type of
They
income.
didn't, no one knew how long this was going to last. Right. And so they were looking for any Band-Aid so they can pay their construction loans. Right. Because they weren't able at that point, the financing market crashed. So they had construction loans, but weren't able to go to perm. And so they were, in peculiar situations to where they were renting these things out and trying to cover their notes, trying to cover their debts. And that was, losing the equity and then having a big challenge with maintaining renters. I mean, we kind of had a mass exodus over a period of a few months with a major vacancy issue. And
Mhm.
it all came tumbling down very quickly to the point of positive cash flow to writing checks every month for a number of months, big checks
Right.
to, pay the debt service. And how long can this last?
Mhm.
And how long can we truly sustain? And what are we really holding on for at this point in time? Because we literally have lost all the equity and we're going to be broke also in like 9 months. We're going to be out of like holdings, out of cash to keep writing these checks. And so something has to give. And that's pretty much what happened. I mean, it was a forced decision. And now we all know that the downturn lasted way longer than anyone anticipated.
Mhm.
And so somewhat glad that we made a decision within the first year to, somewhat start cutting ties. We're trying to work with the banks. At that point, a lot of the banks weren't willing to work with us. It was too new. It was too
Mhm.
fresh. The wind was too fresh. And so only about 2 or 3 years in were banks really open-minded to being flexible with doing short sales and modifications and things like that. It didn't happen in the first 12 months. I can promise you that.
Yeah,
They didn't want to hear it. They just wanted their money, and that was it.
exactly.
Yeah. So it wasn't pretty. It wasn't pretty.
Yeah, that's a cautionary tale for everyone. And oh, hang on, somebody's at our door here. Give us 1 second here.
No problem.
Chop this together later. So you live in Florida now, currently, right?
I'm in Clearwater. That's correct.
Oh, okay, awesome.
Mm-hmm.
This guy talking to Jack here.
Oh, no problem. No problem. And you guys, what part of Minnesota is it?
So we're in Moorhead, which is basically a sister city of Fargo. So we're right on the North Dakota-Minnesota border, Fargo-Moorhead
Got it.
area, and then the state line runs right down the middle of the city, basically.
And your primary business is wholesaling or
We
fix and flip?
We fix and flip and buy and hold. Well,
Okay.
fix and hold.
Great.
Yeah. So our whole goal is to buy discounted, things at a deep discount, and then, I mean, we wholesaled minimally, but our goal is to try to hold everything,
Mm-hmm.
just because we're trying to build our passive income, and we use flipping
I get it.
just as a method of generating chunks of money to purchase more buy and
Yep.
hold.
Same model. Yeah, same exact model. That's kind of what I followed as well. I only flipped when I had to,
Yep.
and I never really enjoyed that part of the business. It just wasn't really fun to me.
Yeah.
And it was more of a job because you got to keep doing it over and over again.
Yeah. So we always try to redirect the profits from that into a buy and hold if possible.
Got it.
So that's kind of our primary model.
So I appreciate you being patient with me there.
No problem.
I've dealt with that guy before. He was going to keep knocking until somebody answered.
All right. So
hopefully it was good news.
Yeah, it was.
We'll pretend that didn't happen, and we'll just I'll chop the video here when we
sure.
So let me ask you another. So I had another question about when you were getting started, before you had done any deals, you had witnessed your mother's boyfriend, doing real estate. How crucial is it for our newer investors out there to have that mindset, to get that mindset right first, to see that it's possible? And how crucial was that for you, being able to, actually go and take action?
I mean, it was everything. I would tell you that going to that 3-day boot camp, obviously you leave those things all hyped up and jacked up and ready to go, and everyone's making money there, but that fizzles out pretty quickly if you don't have someone to, hammer it into your head, or someone that can kind of carry the baton forward and show you that, hey, this is real. It wasn't just this hoorah event that lasted 3 days. And so having David around, I mean, I attribute all my success today to him, because I don't know what I'd be doing if it wasn't for David being there and being that mentor. And so that was critical. I mean, critical for me becoming an investor then, and, even growing into what I've been doing today. And so I don't know if I would just have gone to that boot camp on my own, how it would have turned out, in the long run, not having that person to kind of give me the lead, and kind of walk me along the path for a period of time. So, and seeing him actually,
mentor like that.
Yeah. I mean, seeing someone actually not just put it in action, but someone that had built a lifestyle around it and continued to build upon that lifestyle. That was very important for me to see.
Here's a question. When he
go ahead.
was, investing 20 years prior, and then how did the crash affect his business?
He's very conservative. He number one, it was in Pennsylvania, so different, completely different type of market, very linear market. Yeah, not roller coaster wise like Florida. And so, I never really discussed that with him, but he never brought up the fact that he had challenges at any point during his period. He had been buying for about 12 years prior to me meeting him. But he had never expressed any kind of issues with a downturn in the market, as far as interest rates or anything like that. But I would tell you that he's very conservative. He had very low leverage. He owned a lot of his properties free and clear. So
he's probably able to ride it out then, huh?
Yeah. I mean, he never lost the property that I had known of. Yeah.
Okay, interesting. So tell us about how, when you emerged back and you were ready to get back on the horse, as they say, after you'd experienced the crash, how did you take a left turn into mobile home parks rather than just, do you feel like you were a little bit soured on single family, and did that play into your decision, or?
Not so much. I wasn't soured on single family, but I will tell you that there was a period where I was transitioning, not even by, it wasn't with just necessarily purpose. We were buying multifamily properties. Didn't really even know what we were doing in the multifamily space, but we ended up acquiring multifamily properties while we still owned their single family home portfolio. But we had built such a big machine with the single family home space that it's kind of like turning a cruise ship, right? Like, it takes a lot of time and effort and energy. And it's like, well, why change course if this is a perfectly good course in our mind? And so we never fully made that switch away from single family, although we should have, right? I mean, in my mind, I felt like the multifamily was more scalable. We were working our butts off to grow this big company, and we could have got there a lot faster as far as being cash flow investors and having, thousands of units in the multifamily space, much faster than we would have in the single family home space. Right. And so it wasn't that I was sour with single family. I just think it's a much harder business to scale, and there's easier ways to do it. There's paths of less resistance along the way if you want to build a big rental portfolio. And so after the crash happened, I had many years, took a couple of years hiatus, spent some time on other businesses non-related to real estate. And I had much time to reflect back as to what worked, what didn't work, what I would do differently. And I mean, what I found out is that, like, hey, that multifamily thing, like, in literally a fraction of the time, I could be as large again as I was prior to the crash. I mean, literally in a fraction of the time, a third of the time, it's not less. And so I'm going to focus on multifamily. It's more efficient. We always had management headaches with the single family. We were spread out amongst 5 different counties. It was just a management headache. It's just lots of challenges involved with scaling that side of the business, and we didn't see those same exact challenges in the multifamily space. And so during that period, of my hiatus, when I finally made the decision to jump back into real estate, I kind of went back in with the idea that the landscape's different now. Lending's completely different. There's still a lot of distress in the marketplace. So this is like 2011 era. And so I spent a good bit of time just meeting anyone and everyone that I could that was either that had made it through the crash, that was still in the multifamily space, or maybe they were, I call them the new investors, right? The ones that got in after the crash happened, because I wanted to know from their perspective what was new, what financing looked like, what challenges am I going to face that I wouldn't have faced 3 years prior or 4 years prior. And during that exploration phase, I was introduced to a gentleman by the name of Randy, and Randy had been in the banking side of manufactured housing for a number of years. So he financed mobile home parks essentially, and he retired and he went on to start buying very large mobile home parks here in Florida, and had lunch with him. With no intent whatsoever other than just to meet someone new and to expand my network. That was it. I had no interest in mobile home parks. I didn't really know too much about them, and I didn't really care. But I had that lunch with Randy, 2 hours long, and he piqued my interest many different ways that I didn't expect. And I left that meeting essentially with a focus of give it 1 year to go explore this niche, learn about it, get educated, and buy a mobile home community, and either prove or disprove the concept, and determine whether or not I wanted to focus on this versus multifamily. And so here we are, 6 or so years later. All we focused on from that point forward was mobile home parks. So
Awesome.
Well, I actually, we host the local real estate investing meetup. And I actually was just talking to a fellow investor here last night who purchased his first mobile home park in a nearby community. And one of the things that came to my attention is it seems like the clientele is a little different in these mobile home parks. And how do you manage that side of things? You mentioned that the single family homes were kind of a nightmare in kind of the management. There's this perception that mobile home parks would have a similar, different nightmare.
Sure. Well, I'll try to squash that perception because I think that it's a false one. And I felt the same way. So, nothing against that perception, because I think most people feel that way, which is it's good and bad for our industry. It's good because it keeps some people out of it, less competition, right? But it's bad because it makes it more challenging sometimes to get financing or to even go into a new market and have the local municipality be accepting of this new investor coming in, buying a community in that area, especially if it's kind of a distressed community. But with that being said, just I'm going to try to compare it to single family home and multifamily. So you guys know single family really well, and you know that there's different types of neighborhoods, right? There's neighborhoods that are really rough, war zone neighborhoods, ones that even if you got a property for 10 grand, you probably wouldn't buy it, right? It's not worth the headache or the energy that goes into owning that type of asset and dealing with that type of tenant base. On the flip side of that, or the other end of the spectrum, is an A-class neighborhood, right? A higher-end executive-style neighborhood that's going to have white-collar tenants that make 6 figures plus a year. Sometimes can be a headache as well, but typically they pay their bills on time. They've got good credit, and normally you won't have too much to worry about. And then you got everything in between, right? You got the blue collar folks, right? You got the B and the C neighborhoods. Same thing is applicable here to mobile home parks as is to multifamily, right? So apartments, same thing, A class, and then there's D class on the really low end of the scale, war zone. You don't even want to go in there if you're packing heat, right? Not safe. Mobile home parks, same kind of thing. We've got really nice communities. We own a community that it's gorgeous. There's 2-car garages with attached breezeways. These homes, on average, used homes sell for over $100,000 in this mobile home community. So it's very much it's still affordable in that market, but it's not I work at the dollar store and I can afford to live here, right? It's affordable in that neighborhood, but it's not, affordable like you and I think of as, I make $8 an hour minimum wage, and I'm living in a mobile home park, and I have to sell drugs on the side to, pay my rent. Not that type of community. There are communities like that, right? I don't know what kind of community the person at your real estate investment club owns, but there's communities that we wouldn't touch with a 10-foot pole. Even if they were given to us, we wouldn't take them because they're in the types of neighborhoods that we don't want to own, and they have the type of resident base that we have no interest in actually renting to. For the most part, that type of resident base is very transient. I try to compare them to those that are kind of like hotel or motel dwellers, like the ones that live week by week. Not our tenant base whatsoever. We really cater to the good, hardworking, blue-collar class of folks that need an affordable place to raise their family. They care about their kids' education. They want their kids to go to the good schools, but they necessarily can't afford a $150,000 stick-built home. And so we give them the ability to have a nice home in a clean, safe, and quiet community for a fraction of the price that they would pay to live in that stick-built home in that same school district. So that's our clientele base. Like our average family makes somewhere in the range of $30,000 to $50,000 a year household income. And that's who we cater to. People that like paying their bills, but they don't make, 6 figures a year, but they really do want the best for their family. They want to live in a safe place. They want a home of their own. That's our tenant base. And so if you let me finish here. If you do a good job of screening your resident base, just like in your single family space. I mean, if you're a really horrible landlord and you have an A-class property, you could easily let that D-class person slip through the cracks, right? And they could completely wreck your A-class property. Same thing applies here. I mean, we do a really good job of screening our residents. We don't allow criminals. We do full background checks nationwide. We don't allow sex offenders. You have to meet certain income requirements. You basically have to hit all the checks that you would have to probably live in one of your homes. And so we eliminate a lot of that headache and that riffraff. So
I know, like in the single family space, we almost avoid A class because it's hard to get it to cash flow, right?
Right.
So our target is kind of B and C. Is that similar for yours? Because you mentioned you have a gorgeous park where the units are 100,000 or more. Is that something you would typically avoid? Is it harder to cash flow, something like that?
We're like you guys. We're value-add investors, or we look for deeply discounted opportunities, and so that one was just a very unique opportunity that came across our desk. It's very much an institutional grade property, which in our business means it probably won't cash flow as nice as we would like it to, but we got it. We got a great situation, bought it at a great price, and it's a big earner for us. So with that being said, our normal community is going to be that B or C grade community. It's a star classification system in our business. I don't know why it's different, but a 1-star is like rough, stay away from it. And a 5-star is, lifestyle community with swimming pools and palm trees and, all that fancy stuff. And then we typically fall somewhere in between, like the 2, 3, or 4-star area.
So how do you decide geographically? Is there hot spots in the country, like what markets you choose to target, or will you buy a park anywhere?
We won't buy just anywhere, but we have to be a little bit more diverse as far as our approach to the markets. I mean, there's only about 50,000 mobile home parks throughout the entire United States. Wow. And of that number, only about half of them would even meet our size requirements of what we would even consider owning. And so we don't have the luxury of just choosing like 2 or 3 markets and saying, hey, we're going to buy, mobile home parks and grow to multiple thousands of units under ownership and management in these 3 markets. Could that happen? Yes. Would it be challenging? Yes. And so in order to scale our business, we've got to be very open and flexible. And so with that being said, we've got some economic drivers that we look for, some set criteria. It's got to be a metro population of 100,000 plus people, which is a very small metro, but 100,000 plus people. Median home price has to be $100,000 or higher. Unemployment rate has to be under 7%, hopefully under 6%, but 7% we'll look at it. There's got to be a very diverse employment base there. So it can't be like a 1-horse town where there's like 1 big factory or 2 big, factories or manufacturers that like kind of dominate that marketplace. And if they leave, all the all of the residents leave as well. So factors like that are what we look for. We want to know that there's a demand for affordable housing, right? I mean, our product is affordable housing. And so if we look into a marketplace and we see there's other communities, mobile home parks, or even apartment complexes, and they've got high vacancy rates, well, we dig a little deeper and it's, typically concerning to us. We got to figure out why that is. And so we always look at like the vacant housing inventory. If it's higher than 15%, we get very concerned. Ideally, we like it to be 10% or under. So those are just some of them. We have other things that we look for as well. But so to answer your question, we've researched hundreds of markets, a lot of small secondary, tertiary type markets, smaller markets. It doesn't have to be a large MSA for it to fit our needs. And so
what's your best approach for, let's say you identify a park that meets your criteria? What's your best way to approach the owners? Do you find that most of these parks are owned by what type of entities? Is it, large corporations? Is it mom and pops, or what's your perfect?
Yeah, that's a great question. That's a great question. That's one of the cool things about this niche. It's still very fragmented, in that there's still a lot of mom and pops that own these communities. It's not a very old asset class. In fact, it's other than self-storage, it's literally one of the youngest asset classes in commercial real estate. Majority of the parks that you see out there today were built in the 60s and 70s and 80s, mostly in the 60s and 70s, like the biggest concentrations of those. And so what you find today is that there's still a large number of park owners it's owned by that original developer, or it's owned by that family. Like it's second line now. It got passed down to maybe the children of the original developer. And so, but it's still within the same family. And, but we've purchased a number of our communities from the original developer that they happen to be in their 80s today. The oldest, I think, deal that we have working right now, it's two twin brothers, which is interesting. They're 93 years old, and they built this thing like 40 years ago. Very common story now. It is getting much more consolidated. There's a larger number of professional operators like ourselves getting into the space. There's publicly traded companies in the space. And so the runway, it's limited as far as opportunities, but there's still a ton out there right now. Unfortunately, there's a supply-demand factor that works to our benefit, but also works against us in that they're not building parks anymore. Like there was 3 communities built last year, but there was many more that were redeveloped into something different. And so it's the only asset class that has a diminishing supply. And so we're out there trying to snap them up as fast as possible so that we can somewhat preserve them, cherry pick the really good ones in the great markets, because we know they're not being built anymore, which is, again, it's cool because there's also a barrier to entry. We don't have to worry about competition coming in.
Do you feel like it's because of the stigma, is that municipalities won't allow them to be developed?
That's one of the reasons. That definitely is one of the reasons. Yes. I'd say that's one of the biggest reasons, but also the tax base. If you these things take up a lot of land area. And so in that same amount of land area in a populated municipality, it's probably not the highest and best tax bases that county or the city could achieve. For example, if it's a 10-acre parcel of land, maybe that 10-acre parcel of land, they could accommodate 70 or 80 mobile homes. That same 10-acre parcel of land, they probably could accommodate a 300-unit apartment building, right? The tax base would be much higher on that apartment complex. You're also going to attract a much higher end demographic in that apartment complex than you would in a mobile home community. So with that being said, there's not a lot of benefits for municipalities to get on board with approving these things. Now, I will tell you that there are communities that do get built. Well, the ones that do get built typically are much higher end, more resort style communities, in Arizona or Florida, that are really catered towards 55 plus crowd, people that are retiring, trying to move away from the cold environments down to the warmer states. Those get approved typically, but they're very high end. I mean, they're resorts. I mean, they're not affordable housing. They're lifestyle choices. A lot of times they're second homes, and a lot of times the mobile homes are more expensive than the single family homes in that local marketplace, because you're paying for the community versus living in a mobile home.
So when you're analyzing these properties for acquisition, what do you use to run those formulas? A single family home is pretty straightforward. We do a cash return on investment calculation. I'd have to think that these get a bit more complicated. Is it like a cap rate like you do in a multifamily?
Yeah, I mean, we look at cap rates. Cap rates isn't as relevant to us on the buying side. It is on the selling side. And it's not all that relevant to us on the buying side because number one, we're utilizing leverage, and number two, we buy distressed properties, not necessarily distressed, but underperforming properties.
Mm-hmm.
And so looking at the cap rates of day one going in, a lot of times it's much lower than what it might be, or much higher, I guess, than what it might be, a short time after us taking over and fixing the operational side of things. And so we tend to look at what our 1 year, like, from month 12 to month 24, what our cash on cash return is going to be. And then as far as like an exit is concerned, if we intend on, exiting out a 5-year or the 10-year mark, we'll try to take a stab at what that cap rate would be then, which is kind of like, pie in the sky approach. But, that's when we'll utilize the cap rate to try to figure out what an overall value is going to be if we were to decide to either sell or do a refinance and do a cash out, pull some capital out of that asset. But with that being said, our cash on cash goals are typically in the high teens, anywhere from 16 to 20% annualized cash on cash returns. We want to know that we can achieve that between months 12 and 24, and then stagger that upward trend as we move into the latter years. I can tell you that that's kind of our conservative approach. I mean, we have many communities that we own today that well exceed that 20% cash on cash return mark. And that's utilizing regular leverage. We normally put 70% loan to value debt in place, 20-year amortization. So very conservative debt. But again, we're good at buying these underperforming assets that we know we can fix, whether it be lowering the expenses. That could mean getting rid of 3 managers and utilizing 1 instead of 3 because they've been overstaffed. It could mean there's water and sewer expenses that are out of control. Lots of times we see communities that have older infrastructure, and the park just hasn't done a good job of keeping the abuse down, meaning that the residents they're getting the water for free and they're overusing it. A lot of times we'll go in and put meters in place, like we'll sub-meter the water so that we can control each individual trailer's usage and bill them accordingly. And we'll obviously eliminate that expense completely. So lots of different things we can do to quickly increase the value of these communities.
So when you're acquiring these, how are you financing them? You said are you typically like purchasing them with all cash and then doing some type of refi on the back end, or are you coming in financing right away with putting like 20 or 30% down, or are you raising that from investors, or how do you do that?
Yeah, we have purchased a few for cash, but for the most part, we're putting debt on them on the front end. And we always try to get owner financing if it's possible. I mean, it's always a conversation that we have. It just really depends on the seller's objectives and if it meets their objectives. But, excuse me. I'm very sorry.
No worries.
My allergies are killing me right now. But in any event, we try to get owner financing when we can, but bank debt if not, right? And so there's multiple different options out there for conventional financing sources where we can get either bank debt or there's even agency debt available like Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac. So leverage all the time, or for the most part of the time, leverage. And then once we add value, we'll look at doing a refinance sometime 3 or 4 years down the road.
So when you're going to a bank and approaching them about purchasing an asset like this, have you found it to be more of a struggle than, getting a loan on a single family, which people identify with and can relate to?
Yes, it's probably one of the biggest challenges in this business is the financing aspect. Either the banks, either they get it or they don't. And that's the frustrating part. They either get it or they don't. And it's as simple as that. We've had deals fall apart that are phenomenal deals that cash flow like crazy. And the banks just don't get it.
So what's your recommendation for finding a lender that could potentially work with you? How did you
normally
go about
it depends on the size of the deal. And so if it's under $1 million loan amount, you pretty much have to resort to the local community banks. And so we go with community banks that are within a 25-mile radius of the park. I mean, that's where we start at least. If that doesn't go as planned, we'll extend our reach first off and see if we can find other banks that will lend outside of their market, maybe, reach over into the market where our park is. If that doesn't work out, we'll hand it off to a broker. There's mortgage brokers in our space, but it's very challenging for them to find a national lender that has an interest in a loan amount under $1 million. And so that's kind of our last resort is to hand it off to them and see if they can shop it to more of national base of banks to see if anyone has an appetite for that particular deal. We've had deals that we've had challenges with getting financing. We've gone down all those roads, and then we've gone back to the owner and said, hey, for this, that, or the other reason, this isn't going to happen. It's not our track record. It's not our balance sheet. It's none of that. It's just that these banks don't get this asset, or it's because the park's in bad shape, or the current financials are in horrific shape. One or the other. And any buyer that you have that comes in, if we don't do this deal, any buyer that comes in is going to have the same exact challenges that we're having right now. So I'll prepare you for that. So a lot of times we can convert them to at least holding financing for a temporary period of time. In fact, that community that I told you about, the one really nice one we have, gorgeous community, very well run as far as the overall appearance of it, the condition of it, nearly 100% occupied, but they had a lot of excess expenses on their profit and loss, and so they were running a lot of personal items through this business on an annual basis. I'm talking like to the point to where it didn't make sense. If you looked at just the P&L statement, the deal didn't make sense, but I knew where the problems lie, and I knew we could shave them out of there very quickly. And so we essentially got them to carry financing on that one for a period of time. Even though it's a gorgeous park, they carried financing for a couple of years, and we're still with them right now as far as owner finance, and we're going to take them out here in the next year or two.
Mm-hmm. So when you're talking to the bank, how do they place the value on it? I mean, is it they give you the loan on the land, or do you own the trailer houses themselves? I know it's kind of like the trailer houses are typically seen as a depreciating asset, right? It's not.
That's correct.
It's not an appreciable. How does
That's
that
correct.
Help?
Well, as far as how banks will lend on them, the banks that don't understand the business, typically that's why we pass on them, because they'll just look at it as a piece of land. They won't give any value to the income side of things, which is really, it's an income business. And so those are the banks that don't get it. The banks that do get it, they're going to value it just like they value an apartment complex, which is on an income basis. And so they're going to arrive at their value based on, the gross income to, what the NOI is of that property, and try to, an appraiser is going to try to come up with whatever cap rate they feel that marketplace is and apply value utilizing the NOI and the cap rate. So that's how the banks that get it, that's how they arrive at their value. As far as owning the homes inside the community, I would tell you that in a perfect world, we would not own any of the trailers. Like, that is not the sexy part of this business whatsoever. If there is a sexy part of mobile home park business, that's not the sexy part of it. But we do own, I don't know the exact number. We own over 100, I'm sure, of the trailers. And it's just because what happens is over time, you've got owners that they own these communities. People are living in these communities. Sometimes residents have been there 20, 30 years. Trailers aren't worth that much money. They cost a lot of money to move. I mean, a single wide on average costs right on $5,000 to move and reset somewhere else. And so, people pass away, their heirs don't want the trailer. And guess what happens? They essentially give it back to, the heirs will give it back to the park and say, hey, we don't want this thing. You take it. We don't want to deal with it. Here's the title to it. And so the park will take it. They got the title. Trailers may be worth a couple grand. They're like, well, what do? I can either sell it or maybe I'll just rent it. And they fall into that trap a lot of times where they'll just turn around and turn into a rental unit. And so we've purchased communities that have had 0 rentals, and we purchased some communities that have had as high as like 45 rentals in them. And so we try to sell them as fast as possible and get rid of them. We'll even lose money on them if we can. We know if we have someone that actually owns the home, meaning they bought the home outright from us, their stickiness as being a tenant is much greater than that of that person that's just looking for a 1-year lease, right? The person that has a 1-year lease can easily, just like in an apartment or just like in one of your homes, they can put their mattress on the roof in the middle of the night, pack their bags, and be out. They can be gone. Whereas if they own the home, they sure as heck can't hook it up to their Suburban and tow it away. It doesn't work that way. So they're much more sticky, less transient, and our income is much more stable with that type of individual. So we try to sell these as fast as possible.
I would guess they're going to maintain the units a lot better as well, because they have an ownership mentality.
For the most part, that is we typically see that is the norm. I mean, some do better than others, but if just comparing, homeowners to renters, you're absolutely right. I mean, they're going to take much better care of the home.
Plus, then you don't have the responsibility of maintaining the unit. So
bingo.
Costs are dropped as well.
Bingo. That is just as big of anything else. A community. We have a community today that has I think it has about 30 rentals in it. That community has a full-time husband and wife manager that oversee that. That community takes just as much to manage on a daily basis, a weekly basis, as our community that we have that's 5 times the size of that literally has 0 park-owned homes in it, or rental units. And so the amount of manpower and headache associated with those rental units is pretty substantial. And so our business can be very easy if we didn't own any of those trailers. And so again, our goal is to try to reduce that number as fast as possible. It just seems like we keep buying communities that end up having them. So I don't think we'll ever get to that net zero number, but we sure as heck try to work towards it as fast as possible.
Yeah, because maintaining the dirt is pretty simple. Doesn't require a lot of dollars.
That's it. Our responsibility is basically the roads and the infrastructure. So the water and the sewer lines, the street lights. If there's an office or a common area, like a clubhouse, but that's easy. That's really easy. And we've come to find that we've only ever one time had to evict, and we're really strict about collections. And so we don't let these things go months and months and months. We've only one time ever had to evict someone that was that owned their own home. And it was a very unique circumstance in that this guy lived there for 8 years, owned his home outright free and clear, and went MIA. He disappeared. We literally called the hospitals, called the local jails, prisons, psychiatric ward, and tried to track this guy down, and literally waited a few months because it was the oddest thing that he just disappeared. Wow. He never showed up again. We literally don't know what happened to him. So we had to actually go through the eviction process so that we could get possession of his home so that we could turn around and resell it. That's the only eviction we've ever had, because here's the thing. Every market we own in, across the board, our average rent, some are higher, some are lower, but our average rent throughout our communities, throughout multiple different states, is about $300 a month. In any one of those given markets, there is nowhere, I don't even care if it's just a room that you're renting off of Craigslist, there is nowhere you can live with either yourself or your family of the same quality, even remotely the same quality, for that kind of price, for $300 a month. And so if you can't afford $300 a month, basically you're underneath a bridge or on someone's couch. I mean, like there's no other options at that point in time. And so most people can figure out a way, no matter how dire their situation is, they can figure out a way within a 30-day span to come up with $300. Yep. If that means, pawning their dresser and their big screen TV, like they can figure that one out pretty easily. And so very rarely do we ever have that situation.
That's awesome.
Wait, if somebody was interested in this, like, what would you recommend? How would they get started in mobile home parks? Like, what's a good size park to get started in?
Yeah, we look at how much revenue a park produces. We have on-site managers that reside at each one of our communities. And so the amount of revenue a park produces basically will justify how good of a on-site manager we can afford. You kind of get what you pay for. If you're willing to only pay someone minimum wage, you're going to get minimum wage efforts. And if they're overseeing $1 million, multi-million-dollar property, then it's probably not the best idea to combine the two together. And so with that being said, we've come to find that and this varies, but the minimum size, if I just had to throw a dart at the board, about 40 spaces is about the minimum threshold of what we feel is a feasible size to have a bottom line revenue that's high enough that can afford a good on-site manager to oversee your asset. Now, the variance there exists in markets where lot rents are really high. For example, the smallest community we own today, it's only got 34 spaces in it, but the lot rent's nearly $400 a month. And so it's higher than the average. And so that park there produces as much revenue as a park that is 55 spaces at, $280 a month. So, right. But that's really what you're looking for. You want to know that you can afford a good quality on-site person to oversee your asset for you, and you handle the day-to-day.
So tell us how, if someone was interested in pursuing this as an investment strategy, do you have a podcast? Do you have a company that assists people getting started in this? Tell us about how people can learn more.
Yeah, there's not a lot of educational resources out there on this topic. I mean, if you want to get into the single-family home space or the multifamily space, you can go to Amazon and you can find 1,000 books on the topics. You can find millions of podcasts on the topics as well. There's not a lot out there in our space, but we have a podcast. We've been doing it for about 1.5 years, specifically on mobile home park investing. So I would say the best thing to do is start there. We have like 88 episodes, 80 plus hours of content that you should go listen to, because it's going to either tell you whether or not you want to get in this business or you want to run as fast as possible away from this business.
And what's the name of that podcast, just so everyone knows?
It's called the Mobile Home Park Investing Podcast.
Okay.
And Yeah, you can either find it by going to mobilehomeparkacademy.com, or you can Google my name, Kevin Bupp, or just type in mobile home park investing in iTunes, and you'll track it down pretty quickly.
Awesome.
Well, we really appreciate your time today. This has been really insightful and enjoyed our time. And if anybody has any questions or feedbacks for us, please send us an email at info@reirookies.com.
Check us out on Facebook and Twitter at REI Rookies. And if you like what you're hearing, head over to iTunes, subscribe, rate, and review the podcast. It really helps other rookie investors out there find the show.
And remember, get off the bench
and get into the game. Thanks, Kevin Bupp.
Thank you, Jack and Josh. This has been awesome. Thank you for having me as a guest on the show. I hope I brought a lot of value to your listeners.
Loved it.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, man.